Hey there, and welcome to The Explainer. When we're staring at an ultrasound monitor, it is incredibly easy to believe we're looking through this real-time, totally transparent window straight into our patient's body. But the truth? Well, it's actually a lot more fascinating and, honestly, a little bit deceptive. Today, we're diving into the pretty wild concept that ultrasound images are very often complex illusions. They're basically biological hallucinations painted by a computer. And to truly understand what we're looking at, we have to decode them. So, welcome to our Detective's Field Guide.
I want to kick things off by posing a bit of a provocative question, just to instantly challenge how much you trust those pixels on your screen. Are we actually looking at reality, or are we just looking at the machine's best guess? Because every single time we place a probe on a patient, we're trusting a machine that calculates its images based on a very rigid, highly theoretical set of rules. And the body? Well, the body absolutely loves to break the rules.
Okay, let's take a closer look at these theoretical rules the machine operates by. The ultrasound's entire brain is built on a few core assumptions. First, it assumes that ultrasound waves always travel out and back in perfectly straight lines. Second, it assumes the beam is always this constant, narrow width. Third, it firmly believes that every single time sound hits a tissue boundary, it generates just one neat, single reflection. And crucially, it assumes the speed of sound is a constant 1540 meters per second, no matter what kind of tissue it's passing through. But as we all know, biology is messy. It's packed with fat and bone and gas that completely shatter these rigid rules. And that sets up a massive conflict between the computer's math and biological reality.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a great roadmap for our investigation today. We're going to start with the ultrasound illusion. Then we'll look at shadows and spotlights, followed by bouncing waves and echoes. From there, we'll check out mirrors and phantom organs, speed errors and angles, and then we'll wrap the whole thing up with flaws as diagnostic features. All right, Section 1, the ultrasound illusion, or what happens when biology breaks the rules. So, when biological tissues refuse to play by the machine's rigid rules, the computer just gets confused, and that results in what we call an artifact. Now, it's incredibly tempting to look at these artifacts on a messy screen and get super frustrated by what just looks like image degradation or annoying static. But we actually need to reframe the problem here. Artifacts aren't just noise, they're readable clues. They are essential evidence for our medical investigation, and they literally point us directly toward exactly what kind of tissue, or maybe foreign material, is hiding under that probe.
Moving on to Section 2, Shadows and Spotlights. Let's talk about reading the dark and the light.
Let's explore exactly how we read those dark and light clues by comparing two completely opposite reactions to the ultrasound beam. First, look at the acoustic shadowing. Here, the beam has hit a highly attenuating structure, something like a dense gallstone, that basically absorbs or reflects almost all the sound. Because no sound makes it past that stone, the machine gets no echoes from deeper down, so it just paints a dark void, a shadow. But now compare that to a fluid-filled cyst. This is a poorly attenuating structure. The sound just zips right through it way easier than the surrounding tissue. As a result, the echoes coming from deep behind the cyst are unusually strong, and the machine ends up painting this bright white spotlight right beneath it. And that is what we call acoustic enhancement.
Now, we need to be really precise when we're looking at shadows, because they actually come in two distinct variations that offer a totally critical diagnostic difference. We've got clean shadowing versus dirty shadowing. A clean shadow happens when the beam hits a hyper-attenuating interface. Think bone, calculi, or compact form material, like maybe a foam earplug. It absorbs the beam, creating this crisp, dark anechoic zone right below it. A dirty shadow, on the other hand, is inhomogeneous and kind of hazy. This happens when the beam hits a highly reflective soft tissue gas interface, like say a colon full of gas, which scatters the beam everywhere rather than cleanly absorbing it. Spotting a clean versus a dirty shadow literally tells you instantly if you're dealing with a hard object or a pocket of gas.
Okay, Section 3, bouncing waves and echoes. We like to call this the ping-pong effect.
So, what happens when sound waves don't just scatter, but actually get trapped? Here you can see reverberation, and specifically a type known as a comet tail artifact. So here's the physics behind this specific hallucination. The ultrasound beam hits a highly reflective interface, like gas in the lungs or the GI tract, and sends this massive echo straight back to the probe. But that echo is so strong that when it hits the surface of the transducer, it literally reflects back into the body, hits the gas again, and bounces back to the probe a second time. Ping, pong.
Because the machine calculates depth based entirely on how long it takes an echo to return, it assumes this delayed second, third, and fourth bounce are actually separate structures located deeper and deeper in the tissue. It ends up painting these totally fake, equidistant parallel lines or a bright trail straight down your screen.
Which brings us to Section 4, Mirrors and Phantom Organs. Welcome to Duplicate Realities.
Now, if you thought bouncing waves were tricky, get ready for what is probably the most deceptive hallucination of all. To understand how the machine actually draws a ghost, we have to walk through the step-by-step logic of a phantom organ. Step 1. The ultrasound beam hits a large, smooth, strongly reflective, curved surface, most commonly the diaphragm right next to the lung. Step 2. Instead of going straight back to the probe, the echo deflects off the diaphragm and hits a nearby organ, like the liver. Step 3. The echo bounces off the liver, goes back to the diaphragm, and then finally makes its way back to the transducer. Step 4. Remember, the machine assumes sound travels in a perfectly straight line out and back. Because of that extra pinball bounce, the echo takes much longer to return. The machine gets completely tricked by the delayed return time, so it draws a 100% fake, duplicate liver deep on the opposite side of the diaphragm. Crazy, right? What's really fascinating is seeing this exact process play out in a real biological example. Take a look at this sonogram and the matching schematic. You can clearly see the real liver and gallbladder sitting exactly where they belong. But look deeper, past that bright white line of the diaphragm. The machine has painted a perfect mirror artifact of the liver and gallbladder right inside the thoracic cavity. If you didn't know this was a physical illusion caused by a delayed echo, you might honestly think you were looking at a massive diaphragmatic hernia.
Let's move to Section 5, Speed Errors and Angles. This is what happens when the stopwatch lies.
This brings us to the human element and the machine's ultimate blind spot. Earlier, we noted that the machine assumes sound always travels at a constant 1540 meters per second. Well, here is exactly where that assumption falls completely apart. Sound actually travels slower through fat, only about 1450 meters per second. In this example, part of the sound wave has to travel through thick falciform fat to hit the gallbladder, while the rest travels normally through the liver. The echoes returning through the fat literally take longer to get back. The machine's internal stopwatch registers the delay and assumes that part of the gallbladder must just be deeper. The result? The apex of the gallbladder appears erroneously displaced. It looks fractured or entirely disconnected from its neck, and it's entirely due to a localized speed error.
And you know, it's not just the tissue itself that causes illusions. How we physically hold the probe matters immensely. Look at these two images of the exact same biceps tendon. In one view, it looks completely normal. But in the other, it has this artificially darkened area that looks terrifyingly like a core lesion or a severe tear. This is an artifact called anastropathy. It happens simply because the probe was held in an oblique angle, which caused the sound waves to reflect away from the transducer instead of bouncing straight back. But, hey, here is the great news. This has an incredibly simple physical fix. To cure this specific imaging illusion, you just need to change the angle of the probe so that it's perfectly perpendicular to the tendon. Literally, the moment you square up your angle, the echoes bounce straight back to the machine, that dark spot completely disappears, and you prove the tendon is actually healthy.
And finally, Section 6, Flaws as Diagnostic Features. Let's get to the detective's conclusion.
Let's bring everything we've learned right back to the patient. I want you to read this quote from our source material with me, because it really does completely change the paradigm of ultrasound imaging. Artifacts are omnipresent in ultrasound. Their recognition is used to detect and confirm the presence of calculi or tissue mineralization, gas, cysts, and foreign bodies. Once you truly understand the physics behind the image, the rigid rules, and exactly how biology breaks them, these machine flaws are actually the very keys to solving complex veterinary and medical cases. The shadows, the spotlights, those mirrored ghosts, they are literally the tissue announcing itself to you. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a lingering thought. How will decoding these machine hallucinations change the way you view your next patient's scan? The next time you see a dark shadow, a bright comet tail, or a fractured organ pop up on your screen, I really hope you don't just see a degraded image. I hope you put on your detective's hat, interrogate the physics, and let the illusion guide you right to the truth. Thanks so much for joining me to decode the absolutely fascinating world of ultrasound.